listening to the Northern Hunter Podcast, home of all things hunting, fishing, and outdoors in Alaska.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the show, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is James Payne, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with Harrison Gottshling. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right. That's a cool last name, man.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you reaching out and wanting to come on the show and talk with us a little bit. I know you work with the ATA here in town, and it seems like you have a lot of other cool stories that we can talk about in this episode as well, too. So I'm excited to get to know you a bit. But before we get too carried away into this episode, I did want to give a huge shout out and honestly a thank you to anybody listening that went up to the 40 Mile Country. If you didn't listen in on the last episode, we had Mark Richards on, and he is a big member of the AC board. He's the vice chair. And so I attended the meeting last Wednesday, and we had a pretty full meeting. There was a lot of, it's the first one for the year, so there was a lot of people giving reports and stuff like that, which there always is, but it's always a kind of a catch up on the first one of the year. And part of that was they had a trooper there to give the trooper report. And there were almost no citations giving out with the whole fall 40 mile.
That's pretty incredible to hear.
That's amazing to hear. I mean, especially compared to last year. Last year, I don't remember exactly how many there were. We talked about it in one of the episodes, but it was north of 30 citations.
Oh, I believe it.
And I mean, everything from wanton waste to, it's been a bull only hunt the last couple of years. So there were cases of people shooting cows, and there were cases of people bringing the trophy out before the meet and all this different stuff. And this year, everybody really seemed to be on it. That he said pretty much only bulls were shot. There was like one guy that did a self-turn-in, shot a cow. And that's respectable. If you make an honest mistake, you turn yourself in, I'm not going to look at you sideways. So
must have been a pretty big cow.
That's what I was thinking. Or just no big bulls around. Because it's once you learn them, they're pretty easy to tell the difference.
Oh yeah.
But huge thank you to all the hunters out there for that. That really helps us look good, especially when it comes to publicity and stuff like that. I mean, we're not the only ones talking about the issues up there and whatnot. So the more we can all hunt in a ethical fashion and keep everything going to where nobody's looking at that hunt like it shouldn't be there, then that's a good thing to continue that resource. In addition to that, the new moose registration tags that were released this year, there was really good cooperation with that, really good compliance as far as turning in their tags and everything like that. I asked the question, at what point are you supposed to turn those in? And effectively, because we had asked this question on the show before, or somebody had asked us this question on the show before. And effectively what it is that any of those registration tickets, there's two new ones that they put out for units, most of Unit 20 and then 25C. They replace the harvest ticket. So if you were going to hang on to your harvest ticket to go maybe do one of the winter hunts, maybe the Thanksgiving hunt, anything like that, rather than turning it in at the end of rifle season or the end of bow season, you just hang on to it and use that same registration tag for the next hunt. Which was confusing because on the paperwork it didn't say that. It just said you have till 15 days after the season to report. Mm-hmm. There's multiple moose seasons around here. Yeah. So I know everybody was really confused about that, but word from the higher ups is just hang on to it till the last moose season has passed. If you plan on hunting that moose season, if you're done hunting for the year, go ahead and turn it in. And if you kill something, you are required to report.
Sure.
But there's been really great compliance on that. I want to say that he said there was over 7,000 of those registration permits handed out, and already over 4,200 have returned and reported. So that's pretty good, especially considering most of those other people might be hanging on to their permits for later use. Mm-hmm. So I'm really happy to hear that. Additionally, the sublegal sheep being shot is down considerably. So I think I almost want to say it was 2 years ago. There was same thing. There was north of 30 sublegal rams shot in the area. Now, this meeting didn't cover statewide, but at least in the area pertaining to most Fairbanks hunters, I want to say there was only 2 sublegal rams shot, and both of them seemed to be like right there,
squeakers.
Man. Yeah, like right there. But them's is the rules, So
well, particularly the Fairbanks office is quite
interesting. There's a lot of people who have a lot of gripes with the Fairbanks office, particularly.
Yeah, I have heard that. Yeah, difference in age judging and kind of I'm not going to say it's left up to an interpretation, but
It kind of is.
Yeah, seems that way. So
Yeah.
I know there's been several disagreements with decisions that were made. So
Yeah, I know quite a few sheep hunters who live around this area, and they might not particularly hunt around Fairbanks, but if they are gonna shoot a sheep, they would much rather, especially if it's not like, oh my gosh, this is way over full curl, or like this thing's 10 years old. If it's like, oh, it's 8 years old and it's kind of right on the line, instead of getting in trouble, I'm gonna drive 600 plus miles to go get it sealed in a different office.
Yeah. Yep. I've heard those stories as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with any of that stuff, I mean, I'm sure you could get a second opinion, but I mean, that's really hard.
It's hard.
Yeah. That is really hard to do. So, but yeah, so congratulations to everybody that had a successful year. And thank you all for following the rules and making us all look good as hunters. It's very good to go to these meetings and not just hear a gripe session, the complaints about what needs to be done to correct these issues of people not understanding cows versus bulls or this or that. And it's like, well, as long as everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, we're probably not going to lose anything. So,
For now.
I mean, there's always, yeah, that's true. There is always that aspect. There's some crazy stuff going on in the lower 48. I don't know if you've seen that. I'm not educated enough on it to speak on it on the air, but I can show you some stuff off the air that I've been looking at.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff about Colorado.
Yeah.
Which is pretty spooky.
Mm-hmm, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about it. It's one of those things where it's like Alaska, to me, is maybe like one of the last full stalwarts of hunting in America, where it's like, don't touch our stuff.
Yeah. And they try. I mean, I think we brought it up a few, several months ago now, but they were doing that predator control management down with the Mulchatna caribou herd, and there's like 2 active lawsuits right now.
Yeah,
and this is the stuff most people, if they're just hanging out with their buddies, they might not hear about it. I mean, I haven't seen anything about that on Instagram. I haven't seen anything about that in the news. It's just going on in the background, and if you're not aware, that's why we preach on people to get involved. So, and you've done that in some aspects. I'm excited to talk to you about that a little bit later in the episode, about getting involved with the ATA and all the stuff that they do for trappers' rights and stuff like that as well, and what your role is in that. Let's go into that shortly, real quick. What do you do for the ATA?
So I only recently took a position with the ATA, and that I'm the sponsorship and advertising coordinator for the Trappers Association. So I contact local businesses or countrywide businesses that are involved in the trapping area and try and get them to sign on with us by advertising space in our magazine that's published 7 times a year.
Okay.
And try and get on some sponsorships and whatnot, but it's quite challenging.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
It's not the Trappers Association in Alaska, especially ours. While we're the biggest, we're not the only one, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
in Alaska?
In Alaska.
No kidding.
Yeah. I can't remember the name of the other organization, but it's down South Central.
So, okay. Gotcha.
And even the chapter that's in South Central, Eagle River, Wasilla, Anchorage, it's separate from Fairbanks. They have their own board members.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we're not one big happy family, but we kind of are.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because I know there's 2 different flings. I like to attend the fling events in the spring times. Those are always a good time.
Yeah.
And I do seem to remember them talking about something like that, where it was very separated. But it is always nice to see businesses come on board and support you guys. I know, I think Lithia was there last year.
Yes.
And gave a nice speech. And he even talked about how, supporting something like a Trappers Association can damage business in today's climate of anti-hunting, anti-trapping. Pretty much the only thing that's not on the menu is sport fishing. And even that, if you dig deep enough, there are people that don't like that either. But hunting and trapping are really the 2 big ones. And I would almost argue, if trapping had as much attention drawn to it as hunting does in like the media and stuff like that, it would probably get more hate. Like I would almost say per capita, more people dislike trapping.
Yeah. The idea of taking fur is completely abhorrent to a very large swath of the nation.
Yeah. Which is ridiculous, because it's the most eco-friendly material you can get.
It really is.
It's a renewable resource. It's biodegradable.
Mhm.
You know, it's not these plastic fibers that are on all the Canada Goose coat roughs now.
Absolutely.
You know, they're just going to be there till the end of time, and unless they get melted down and used for something else, which don't mean to break it to anybody, but most of these recycling centers don't actually recycle anything.
No.
And if they do, it's like 10% of what's actually dropped off.
Mhm.
So yeah, all this talk of like, oh, well, using synthetics and plastics is fine because it gets recycled. Yeah. Dig deeper. No, it doesn't.
Depends on what kind of plastic it is too.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And that was a huge thing. I watched I almost want to say it was like an hour and a half long documentary on that. Somebody went and tracked a lot of this stuff, and it was really weird how these barges full of, plastics were getting shipped off to these other countries and dumped other places where it wasn't really supposed to be trackable. But, when people are motivated enough, they can track down a lot of cool stuff. So,
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah. I'll want to pick your brain a little bit more about the ATA here later in the episode, but, let's talk about you for a little bit. So you grew up here, correct?
Born and raised in Fairbanks. Yeah.
Born and raised in Fairbanks. All right. And was hunting, trapping, all that always like part of your life growing up, or was that something you got into a little bit later?
So growing up, my dad was quite a bit older in age whenever he had me, and he was always really big into hunting. And my uncle was Dave Kellyhouse, and he was the head of game commission for Fish and Game for many years in the 90s. And so him and my dad would always hunt together. And whenever it came time for me to go hunting, it's always like, oh, you're in school. I can't take you out of school right now. It's, mostly just a cop out of, oh, I don't want to take a kid along right now. I'm having fun with my friends. It's the only time of the year I get to do that.
Right.
And I don't blame him. But we did fish a lot. Every summer I was king fishing on all the rivers.
Nice.
Went down to the Nishigak quite a few times, Gulkana, Little Sioux, Clutina, Kenai. Those were my stomping grounds as a kid.
Right on.
I shot my first caribou when I was 11 with my dad out of the 40-mile country. We flew out somewhere.
Okay, nice.
Or actually, we drove a nodwell out from Chicken.
Wow.
And that was like a 2.5 week long adventure, and it broke down a few times on the way and had to get stuff dropped out of airplanes and mountainsides for us to get to fix and whatnot. But
man,
it was quite an adventure.
Sounds like it.
And so that's where I like to think that I turned in from a boy to a man on that trip.
At 11 years old.
Yeah. And so from 11, after shooting my first caribou, it was kind of a few years before I went back out to that country with my dad, and we reused that nodwell with some of his friends and shot a few more caribou, stuff like that. But then, other than that, like I never really did a lot of hunting through my teenage years. And then it wasn't until I was in my early 20s when I was about to have my first kid where I was having like this existential fatherly crisis of like, what am I going to do to turn him into a good person? And, or her, because we didn't know what we were going to have. And so I was like, well, the outdoor space has a lot of parallels through life.
Yeah.
It's difficult. You get something out of it if you're patient enough or, really take the time to be dedicated enough to pull something out of the field.
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, I'll get into that. And I shot my first moose with my friend's dad. I think I was like 24. And from then on, it's just been going crazy.
Yeah.
Every year, shoot moose for a couple years straight with some friends and whatnot and bringing them into everything, and then moving to caribou and then getting infatuated with sheep and then going crazy for sheep for a few years until I killed one. And then, I've sheep hunted almost every year since then, either a little bit or a lot, and haven't been successful for, one reason or another.
It's a hard time to be into sheep hunting.
It really is.
Yeah.
And so, I only got into trapping, I think, back in 2018 or 2019.
Okay.
And just kind of, I was a part of the Trappers Association at that time. I never went to the meetings, but they have a pretty decent Facebook page that kind of circulates throughout the state. And there was someone who was getting rid of a trap line. And so, he was like looking for a new trapper to take over this section of my line. I'm just getting too busy. I can't do all 3 different lines.
Sure. Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. And so I paid him a little bit of money to purchase his traps and some of the boxes that he had built that he had left out there. Nice. And then he just kind of gave me a GPS point and was like, there you go. I go to the north and I go to the east.
Yeah.
Figure it out. and so it was one of those things where it's like, okay, I'm going to read some manuals, try and figure out what the heck's going on. and go from there. And so honestly, the first couple seasons, I caught nothing but birds and squirrels. No martin, no ermine, no lynx, no nothing. And so everything was so new and it was just exciting. And, I journaled every day that I was out there and what's the temperature at home? What's the temperature there? What's the wind doing? What tracks do I see? How much snow?
Mm-hmm.
And so it became a very much like a cathartic experience for me to just continue to be methodical about what I'm doing, what I'm looking for, what I'm seeing. And and it really just opens the woods up to a totally different perspective that you don't look at, especially in the wintertime where everything's easily trackable.
Right. It does. Yeah.
And it allows you to get out in the winter, which is a huge part of it for me.
Yeah. No, you'll be more busy than you want to be in the wintertime.
Oh, yeah.
With a long enough trap line.
Yeah.
So I like what you said about journaling too. That's a huge one that I recently started doing with pretty much every trip I go on. And I started to realize I would miss details in my memory.
Absolutely.
What was the weather doing this particular day when I did see a lot of moose or I didn't see a lot of moose and the browse and everything else, or same with caribou, same with, even fishing. If you write those details down, you don't have to write a whole, deer diary kind of thing. But, just some basic details and a basic report, maybe draw some pictures or something like that, have some fun with it. That's one thing a lot of the old timers used to do. And I kind of picked that up and it's been really enlightening to look back on those and remember details that just kind of fade to the background until you need them,
Yeah, I don't particularly plan on rereading my journals. Mm-hmm. It's more or less of almost doing it just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
It kind of makes you think about your day that you had out there a little harder. And especially if you're wrapped up in a hunt where, you're dedicated for like a week out somewhere. Mm-hmm. I found it becomes quite difficult to make yourself sit down and do it.
It does. Yeah.
And it's the end of the day and you're like tired and you're eating food and maybe you've had a couple beers around a campfire and it's like, maybe I'll do it in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been a couple of trips where I got home and realized that I just didn't do it at all. And, just kind of, man, like, really? But then I try to write down as many details as I can remember, and then I haven't really, I haven't gotten a full one yet, but I like to try and I'm about to, we're about to roll over in the new year, so I'll get a new one for the next seasons and everything. And I like it. It's a fun time. So yeah, and then you got, looks like, based on your Instagram, you've done pretty good since then. So
pretty good.
Looks like you've gotten out and done quite a bit of stuff, including some lower 48 hunting. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you, I was wanting to pick your brain about this because I've wanted to go on aoudad hunts for a while now. I was supposed to go on one I think it was 3 years ago. Some things came up and we didn't end up being able to go on the trip, but looks like your kid got one.
Yeah. So my wife's mom and her husband live in South Central Texas.
Perfect.
Almost all the way down to the border type of thing. And they live 45 minutes outside of their city, which is smaller than Fairbanks. Mm-hmm. And so they are on a very remote parcel of land out in the middle of nowhere. And so I'd be a bad person to pick a brain about aoudad because for them, it's just a nuisance.
Right.
They're everywhere. You see hundreds a day.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Really?
Just wandering around. And, everyone around them has a feeder. I think you have to have 5 or 10 acres of property to be able to put a feeder out there. But they have quite a bit more than that. And so they've had that out there for a long time. It came from my wife's husband's dad. Mm-hmm. And so he had it out there for a long time. And it's like a small shack that's like 8 by 10 with little sliding windows. And you get to point the rifle out. And, it's like, all right, kids, come on, get in the truck. We're going to go sit down. And, the kids will be asleep. And I'll be sitting there and, hey, wake up. Come on. Get right here. Getting sleep out of his eyes and getting the gun shouldered and everything. And it's a hoot.
Nice. Yeah. I've been wanting to go after one of those for, like I said, a long time. And they're just real pretty animals. I mean, they got real nice shape to their horns and everything. And, I know I was feeling, I know in your post, you had written how he had to stay steady for quite a while to wait for this thing to get into shooting position. And I really felt with that because I had the same experience in Africa, actually. I got stuck watching a ram impala, and he was just behind a bush and just would not step out to where you get that clean shoulder shot. And man, I was just hunched over and just standing in this like awkward position because I wasn't like, they were telling me, don't move. He's looking right at us. And then there were these ewes over here that were looking right at us. And it it was like the most uncomfortable thing in the world. So for a kid to do that, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And so with Audad down there, you only need a small game hunting license to shoot them.
Really?
Yeah.
No kidding.
And especially for youth, it was like $30.
Wow.
And there's no requirements to get them sealed or, you got to report it.
Yeah.
But you can shoot rams, ewes, lambs. You can shoot as many as you want. It doesn't matter.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
So they really are nuisances down there.
They are,
then,
yeah.
Huh?
And so
I didn't realize they were that big in population.
Oh, man, it's unbelievable in South Texas.
Yeah.
I've heard that Western Texas is real big into them, where you have some of the ranches that are multiple thousands of acres.
Yeah, that's where I was looking at before.
Yeah, and that kind of a hunt is probably more closer aligned to like paralleled to a sheep hunt up here, where it's like, super glass intensive. You have to sit for long periods of time to spot it, and long walks, maybe sometimes long shots or whatever.
Yeah.
But for us, it couldn't have been farther from the truth. It's like a 5-minute drive from the house, and go cruise down, fill up with coffee and snacks, and just sit down and wait until you see what you see.
Nice. Were they mixed in with any other animals down there? Like, do they have a lot of deer or anything?
Yeah, they have a lot of whitetail deer.
Okay. Yeah.
But what my in-laws like is they like to watch the deer.
Okay.
More so than the Audad. And so most times whenever we would get there and there'd be deer on the stand or at the feeder, just kind of hanging out, they would pick up their head, they'd look off to the side, a couple hundred yards away, they'd see Audad coming. And once the Audad move in, the deer would just slowly saunter out and away.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So they just kind of pushed them out, just not even with any aggression, just like the deer were just thinking this isn't worth my time. I'm not going to sit here and compete. And so.
Right. Yeah, there's probably another feeder not too far away.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting. That's a whole different aspect to Audad hunting.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've also kind of has kept me from going down there is just cost, honestly. I mean, some of these ranches out in Western Texas, they're charging quite a bit for these animals, and that's almost what led me to believe they weren't that prevalent.
Oh, they are.
But yeah, that's
at least in some areas.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. Huh. Did you ever do any boar hunting down there?
Nope. We've never seen a boar or a javelina in that area before.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder if they're mostly just in other areas of Texas.
I would imagine they'd have to be.
Yeah, because I know they're considered major pests.
Sure.
All around the southern part of the states.
Yeah, there's no agriculture in this area where my in-laws are. So
Gotcha.
I think that they'd probably be more around big ag areas.
Sure. More feed and everything like that.
Yeah, because where we are where they are is just it's an ancient riverbed.
Gotcha.
And so, you'd go to these areas that are like over 150 feet in elevation difference from the river, and you'd find seashells all over the place.
Really?
So yeah, they're just ancient riverbeds. And last time I was there, I think it was in 2015 or 2016 with the in-laws at Christmas time or whatever. And the water was up like 30 feet from what it was when I was down there this past Christmas. And so I was just cruising around on the beach down there, found some arrowheads.
No kidding.
Yeah, that
How cool is that?
Oh man, I was geeking out.
Yeah.
So every day I would go sit at the stand, either night and day or both. Every day, I didn't miss a single day of like 2 weeks we were there. I just like going out and sitting.
Sure.
But during the day, there's nothing else to do. So it's like, let's go walk the river, see what we can find. And yeah, we found several.
Nice. Dude, I got to take my wife down there then. Yeah, she's got degrees in like archaeology, anthropology, way smarter than me, right? And but we were hiking around in Wyoming one time, and she starts picking up these little slabs of rock and little itty bitty tiny little things, and she starts explaining to me that's from the creation of these old arrowheads and everything.
Oh wow!
So it's the stone lapping or whatever it is they call that. And but I mean the eyes people get when they're educated on that stuff, it's crazy. She could pick that up from just as we're hiking a trail or something like that. You know? For me, it would have to be a full blown arrowhead to even recognize what it is. But no, that's. Man, I like seeing all that old history stuff. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, what's pretty crazy is that there's some lakes that are close by Fairbanks. I won't name them. Where I have some family who have a cabin out on one of the lakes, and for whatever reason, I was told by an archaeologist that's at the University Museum here that the alkaline levels in there are like especially good for preserving fossils of certain kinds.
Oh, okay.
And so we went out there one summer several years ago, and my kid's godfather showed me all these bones that he had found just in the water. And so it just was like, what the heck? Are you serious? And he's like, yeah, go look. This is 10 minutes of looking. And so we found a Rubbermaid tote full of different bone fragments of like full bones, little bones, big bones, tiny black rocks. It looked really weird that my wife found and stuff. And I worked at the university at the time, so I went and talked to the guy, and he was like, he's like, where'd you find these? And I told him, and he's like, technically, if they're below the high water mark, they belong to the state.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. I was like, well, do you want to keep these? He's like, no, but if you don't mind, can I inventory them and I'll tell you what they are? I was like, heck yeah, dude. Go ahead. Tell me, please. And so we had found like elk ribs and elk scapulas.
No kidding.
Yeah. And
really
moose bones and ancient petrified goose bones. And I brought him these little rocks, and he's like, oh yeah, this is a flesh scraper from obsidian. And there's no obsidian around here. They brought it over from the Bering Land Bridge to come down here. And for me, that just blew my mind. And my wife found a piece of steep bison horn core, just like a small fragment, like 6 inches long by 2.5 inches wide. And he's like, do you mind if we radiocarbon date this? Because we've only found one other fragment of bison around this area.
Yeah.
Like, sure. And it came out to be 33,000 years old. And it's like, what in the world, man?
That lake is magic.
Yeah. And so
wow.
I put that in a shadow box and gave it to my kid's godparents as like this is really cool. Thank you. And
that's awesome.
Overlaid it with a topographical map of the area and everything. So it turned out to be pretty cool.
Yeah. Dude, that's wild. I know I was looking into that at one point, the changeover in species, throughout the area and whatnot, and how it used to be primarily like bison and elk and whatnot until, from what I remember, I think they said that it was until it became primarily swamp up here. As the permafrost rolled in and as the terrain changed, the animals that had wider hooves or could, walk on the tundra are the ones that stayed. So you get the moose, you get the caribou.
Interesting.
All of those ones, and then the elk and the bison kind of not so good. Breaking legs, rolling ankles, I'm sure. We've all walked through tussocks. It sucks. So, but that's wild that there was like elk fragments and bison stuff in there. Dude.
It's unreal.
That's insane. Man, oh man. That's the cool thing about Alaska, man. You never know what you're going to run into in this state. So let me ask you about this. So you did a sheep film about your hunt when you got your ram. 2 questions. One is, how'd you get linked up doing that? And 2, I wanted to kind of expand on that story a little bit, because it was a shorter film. It was like, what was it, like 8 minutes long, I think it is.
I couldn't tell you.
I watched it after you reached out to the Instagram and everything, and actually, with your permission, I could probably throw that link on the on the show notes of this one if anybody wants to watch you go kill a ram. But yeah, why don't you break that down a little bit? Your kind of journey in sheep hunting.
Well, so for me, my first year of sheep hunting was in 2017. I had no idea what I was doing. I was calling all kinds of fish and game offices, trying to pick people's brains, and I called an office outside of Fairbanks, and they were like, why don't you go check out this creek? I'm like, okay. So I had never backpacked before, slept out of a backpack ever. And I had a friend who came with me who is probably about your height, much taller than I am.
Yep.
Legs for days. Yeah. And he was an athlete. So, for him, throwing on whatever pack he had, 60 pounds, that's fine. He can go forever.
Right.
And for me, it's like, my legs are dying. I am dying right now. I can't do this at certain times. And so I had bought like an external frame pack, like an Alps Outdoors from Sportsman's for $100. I think my pack weight was 68 pounds to 72 pounds for like 10 days worth of stuff. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And it was the most miserable hike of my life to this day.
Yep.
We did see sheep, but it was just an absolutely miserable hike, taking your boots off 15 different times in a 5-mile stretch to cross creeks that go up to your belly button.
Yep.
And it was just a nightmare for me, and a really eye-opening of like, what the heck am I doing? Why am I here?
Yeah.
But after seeing sheep, it really lit that spark. And so the next year is whenever I shot my sheep, and I got connected with the filmographer. His name is Steve Frith. He has a YouTube channel called The Heart of Hunting. And his wife was about to go to med school to become an OBGYN. And so he was like, well, this is my last season as a resident in Alaska. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to film and hunt for 50 days this season. And I'm going to get with as many people as I can to film their hunts. And so this guy, Steve Frith, I didn't know him. And I got linked up with him from a friend, and, we had talked and like, hey, you want to go sheep hunting? This is the area that I'm thinking. And I didn't know him at all going into it. So we did like one scouting trip in that July. We went to an area that we thought we were going to go past, and there was like a 150-foot waterfall. And we're like, okay, we can't go this way. What about this way? Nope, that didn't work. So, it's like August 8th or something that we actually get out there. And we just started to hike on a trail, and there was like a very small opening in some trees. I'm like, let's go up here. And so we just follow that and just keep going and going and going. And yeah, what he did is he recorded daily films for every day that we were out there, and then turned certain hunts of that season into short films as well.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So there are other videos up there that kind of break down day by day and what we did and where we walked and stuff. So it gets a little bit more in depth than just that shorter video.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's hard to break down a long hunt like that into, I want to say it was like 8 minutes or something.
Okay.
And it was very well done. I will say that. He's a very good filmmaker.
He's very talented.
Yeah. I mean, from the shot angles to the audio to that's just...
the B-roll, everything.
Yeah. Putting it all together and, the music and everything. It was very, very well done. So that was awesome to see. But yeah, very, very short for I'm sure the amount of time you guys were out there.
I think we were out there for 6 days, and we ended up hiking 40 miles before we shot the sheep, and 20 miles out. And
holy
and
cow,
so
man.
Like I had never thrown a big backpack on before, like over 100 pounds. And it was like 10 minutes into maybe an hour into the first day that we hiked 10 miles the first day and 10 miles the next. And about an hour into the first day of this big pack out, I tried to step over this creek that was quite low, but deep. And I fell in. My boot got soaked. I fell all the way up to my butt. The bottom of my pack was soaked. Like,
oh no, dude.
And he was so far ahead of me that I was just yelling and shouting and cussing like crazy and just literally shouting as loud as I could. And no one could hear me.
Man.
But it was a great time. And ever since then, it's just, I kind of got frantic about sheep and the allure of them. And then after I shot one, it kind of was just like a big weight was lifted off my shoulders of like, I can rest. I can focus on other stuff. I can have fun again.
And honestly, that comes through in the video when he's filming you right after you take your sheep and everything, your ram, and you're doing your talking right next to the sheep. I mean, you can tell. I mean, you were very full of emotion and very, that sense of accomplishment was very.
It was very difficult because I had a pretty crummy rifle, and it was farther than I had ever shot, and it wasn't sighted in for the best at that range, and so it took quite a while for me to finally get it on the ground. And after that, I really changed my attitude about, okay, I need to become more proficient. I need to buy a better rifle. And ever since then, I've been very comfortable shooting out to 500 yards.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference.
It is.
When it comes to the confidence that you have in your rifle, that it's going to be shooting where you are going to put the crosshairs and to be calm and cool and collected.
Yeah.
And it makes a huge difference.
It does. And that's a huge thing to just, it's amazing with modern technology how easy it is to, I'm not going to say easy, but how achievable that is.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of these rifles that aren't super expensive these days are very accurate right out of the box. I mean, Tikkas.
Yep, that's what I shoot.
Yeah, they're great rifles. I mean, and you can pick one up. I mean, I know some of their models used to be $850. I think some of their higher, like the T3X Rough Light or Rough Tech is the one I got for my wife. I think that one's closer to 12, but it's just a little bit different stock design. It's a little bit different texture, but I mean, they're great rifles. They're accurate. They're light. And I like that they have like the removable or the interchangeable grip part.
Yeah.
You can do the vertical grip or the traditional hunter style. And phenomenal starter rifles. Weatherby makes their Vanguard lineup. Vanguards are very accurate, and they're similar price point to a Tika, I would say. And they're even coming out with some of their Mark V line that's actually lower in price point, closer to that $1,000 mark, rather than being way out of everybody's price range, unless you're retired.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of really good options that'll get you on target and get you that repeatability. And then even optics these days, you don't need the $2,000 scope.
No, you don't.
You
really don't.
It's nice if that's your passion and you want to play with it. And sure, there's going to be bells and whistles that one has that maybe others don't.
Sure.
But honestly, a lot of those bells and whistles you'll never even use.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the point?
Unless you're trying to shoot out to, 4 digits.
Right. Yeah.
That's a different story. But for most people who are going to be shooting under 500 yards,
mm-hmm.
like I think I maybe spent around $1,500 for my rifle and scope setup.
Yeah.
And I'm supremely confident in it. I have a Tika T3X super light and 6.5 Creedmoor.
Mm-hmm.
I just bought a Leupold VX3i with the CDS turret on it.
Yep. That'll do.
Send him that info and I'll be darned. That thing is bang on.
Yep. Yeah.
It's surprising.
They do a good job with that. And I was talking to a guy earlier. He has multiple turrets.
Oh.
Because he's figured out where, like when he changes elevation and everything,
really?
like all the little details, which don't really matter inside 200-300 yards,
Mm-hmm.
but once you get to extended ranges can take effect. And if he knows he's going to be hunting in an area that's primarily 4,000 feet above sea level versus the moose swamps that are,
couple hundred.
Yeah, 200 to 400 feet above sea level. He'll actually change his turret out and do that. And I think it's like $100 to get a new turret from Leupold. That's
not
got
much.
your yardages on it and your data and everything. It's a pretty cool setup. Leupolds are pretty dang solid as far as optics go. That's actually the one I always recommend to people when they're looking, because it doesn't matter if you get the VX3 or the VX6.
It really doesn't.
It's gonna track. It's gonna be a good optic. Your glass quality is gonna be good. Even the VX3 might not be as good as the VX6, but it's gonna be good. You're gonna have good light transmission and all that stuff. Field of view is good in pretty much all of them.
Yeah, and we don't have like the big twilight hours in the morning and the night and everything.
No.
It's not about giant objectives up here.
Mm-hmm.
You can get away with a 40 millimeter objective and be totally fine.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and that's honestly, I think a lot of people short themselves is kind of that. They don't do the research into the gear, and I honestly I can't hate on Savage either. I'd like to to talk smack about just going and buying the $400 rifle that comes with a scope on top of it.
That's what I was shooting when I killed that sheep. I mean, it worked, but my goodness, did it make it challenging?
Exactly. But that limits you on what you can do. And like for me, like my rifles, I like to be able to shoot several hundred yards farther than I ever plan on killing an animal at. And a lot of that has to do for backup shots, right? Especially on good night moose.
Mm-hmm.
You can hit a moose with a 338 and they'll just soak it right up. And they'll wander over maybe another 80 yards and turn broadside again. And I like having that confidence that even if I'm shooting it at my max cutoff point, that's not my bullet or my rifle's max cutoff point.
Yeah.
That's just where I want to cut myself off.
Mm-hmm.
I can get closer. I can challenge myself to be a better hunter and get a little bit closer.
Sure.
Not to say that long range hunting makes you a bad hunter. I'm not trying to say that at all. I just realized how that sounded, but I love long range shooting, and I think that in the appropriate context, long range hunting is awesome, and it presents its own challenges in its own way. Actually, I really like watching those videos, like people that hunt pronghorn and whatnot down there. I mean, I've seen people take some crankers on pronghorn, dude. I mean, 1,200 plus. And up here in Alaska, I used to judge rifles based on if they could kill a moose at like 1,200 versus 1,500 yards, and then I started to realize like I've never been in a situation where I could shoot one that far, and I don't think I will ever be in a situation where I can shoot one that far. And even if I was, even if let's say I'm in the nice field and I could see one far away, I still don't even know if I would. Like an animal that big, I mean, sure, it's a bigger target, but it's also a tougher target, and then I got to get there.
Yeah. And pack it across that 1,200, 1,500 yard swamp, whatever.
And especially here in Alaska. I mean, if let's say you're on the plains of Kansas and you're shooting pronghorn and you've got one at 1,200 yards, you can pretty much guarantee you can get there fairly easily. You might have a few hills, rolling hills here and there. You might have a creek to cross. But there's really as someone who spent 19 years in Kansas, I didn't run into any terrain at any point that I couldn't traverse, like it's the plains. Fences keep me out of most places more than terrain. But up here, you can get cliffed out and not even know that cliff was there.
Yep.
There can be impassable sections of swamp and muskeg and, raging creeks that you didn't know were there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to keep it inside the range that I know is visible. So that's my take on long range hunting in Alaska is know how to get to it after you shoot it.
Yeah.
Especially if it runs off. That's my other consideration is if I shoot something at 900 yards, which sure, I've got platforms that are good at that. I've got platforms, where I'm confident that I could make that shot. But let's just say it runs off after I get what I assume is a really great shot. That's 900 yards I have to go before I even start blood trailing this.
Yeah.
It's a lot of considerations more than just your shooting skills and your setup and your bullet and everything like that. So, but no, that's awesome to hear. You got a better rifle setup since then. And I'm glad that setup that you had did work for that hunt. Because I have heard other horror stories.
It almost didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My other question regarding your gear, what kind of boots did you have and how'd they hold up? 'Cause that is a long ways to hike, bro.
So that year I had some Loa Renegades, some $120 boots from REI.
Mm-hmm.
It had no rubber rand around the outside of it.
Yep.
They were terrible. I had blisters on both balls of my feet, blisters on both heels, big toes, pinky toes. My feet were falling apart, but it's one of those things where it's like you're already back in there,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just kind of dumb enough to be like, let's keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like day 3 and you're not seeing anything. And then all of a sudden you see something at like 6 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, okay, well, how far is that away? All right, let me bust out my paper map. And that's 8 miles as the crow flies. Okay. Yeah, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just one of those things where it's like, you just have to be dumb enough to go.
Yep.
But now I have been wearing Hanwag Alaskan boots. And they fit my feet very well. They're super comfortable. I don't get blisters in them.
Nice.
So I wear them for work sometimes when I'm climbing towers.
Okay.
They hold up real well. And yeah, I've had them for several years and put several hundred miles on them, and they're awesome.
There you go.
I have some friends who their feet just suck.
Yeah.
No matter what. They've tried Crispies, any of those other ones, and it doesn't work for them. But for me, I'm lucky.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's I've heard some pretty bad horror stories about that. Yeah, I don't even think I know if I've heard of that brand of boot before. Is that
just some German brand?
Nice.
Yeah, Barney's in Anchorage stocks them.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I'm going to be down in that neck of the woods here soon anyway. So
yeah. Barney's is actually our premier sponsor for the Alaska Trappers Association for the year.
Awesome.
So instead of Lithia being last year's, Barney's is this year's.
Oh, great.
And so that was a very exciting client for us to acquire.
Yeah.
And, getting to talk to Kevin over a few weeks for myself was really exciting because his business is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It's a giant staple of the hunting community or outdoors community in Alaska. And so getting to know him a little better and really working out details business-wise and having him be our premier sponsor for the year is super exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. So how does that work? So the sponsorships is I know you were talking about there's 2 different boards and everything, and it's not like one big happy family, even though it is.
Yeah.
The sponsorships, is that for all across the board, across the whole organization?
Yeah, it is for the Alaska Trappers Association.
Gotcha.
Regardless if we don't really even call them like a separate chapter.
Okay.
They're still under the umbrella of the Alaska Trappers Association. There is another organization that's completely separate from us.
Right, the one you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I honestly I do not know their name.
Yeah.
But
more localized to their region though, huh?
Yeah, it's in South Central.
Yeah.
But for us, of all the members that we have, we send a magazine to every member. And so that hits everyone in the state.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, right on. Well, let's take a quick break real quick, and then I want to pick your brain more on that stuff.
Sounds good.
Hammer Bullets produces what we at the Northern Hunter consider to be the most premium and best working monolithic bullets on the market today. These bullets are easy to load, extremely accurate, and best of all, they're always in stock and ready to ship. The guys at Hammer designed them so that after penetrating the hide of an animal, it sheds its petals, initiating a massive energy dump while retaining the rear shank for maximum penetration. These bullets are built with 100% focus on how they perform on game, and their proprietary designs produce great BCs with specialized pressure grooves for amazing inherent accuracy and speed. They have a minimum expansion velocity of 1,800 feet per second, which allows for long-range shots, but with no maximum velocity, making them perfect for every cartridge from your granddaddy's old 30-30 to the high-velocity round like the Weatherby 30-378 without having to worry about your bullet failing. To view their expansive selection and find the perfect match for your hunting needs, go to hammerbullets.com and use discount code TheNorthernHunter to drop the hammer on your next adventure.
All right. So as far as the sponsorship for the ATA goes, I know we've got some business owners that listen to this and whatnot, or some people that just might be interested in helping out if they feel so inclined. Are there different tiers of sponsorship that you guys, have like different levels for different layers of business? Maybe an individual can sponsor you guys at some level, or small business versus big business.
Absolutely, yeah.
Bronze to gold tier kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of any and all between.
Okay.
From several $100s or a couple $100 all the way to multiple thousands of dollars. And, it goes from anything from being able to sponsor, like a porta potty at the fur auction for a couple $100 or like a coffee cart there, all the way to being premier sponsors for multiple thousands of dollars. And pretty much anything and all between. You can sponsor individual meetings that happen in Fairbanks and sponsor individual meetings that happen down in South Central.
Gotcha. Is that like paying the rent for the space and everything like that?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just kind of covering the cost of operations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, it can really depend on how much the particular company wants to be involved. If it's someone who is just like, I'm not going to get any business necessarily from this particular sponsorship, and really just show support for their organization, which is really kind of the backbone of sponsorships, right?
Sure.
It's about showing support for the organization and willing to be able to support what our ideals are and what our board and our organization really pushes for. Like, for instance, earlier this September, Governor Dunleavy was in town signing some bills, and one of them was allowing trapper cabins to be maintained and built on BLM property.
Oh, did he actually sign that one?
Yes, he signed it in town here at the Mushers Hall.
Good. I remember hearing them talk about that last year.
Yeah, right in the middle of September. And he also signed a couple other bills, which I think one was for selling railroad property in Nenana to the public to be able to expand Nenana as a whole. And I apologize, I can't remember the third one.
Okay.
Or it was about veteran disability hunting access.
Oh, cool.
That's what it was. Yeah. So
Nice.
there were 3 bills that he signed here in town. And so, it shows that our organization as a whole does actually do work.
Yeah.
Right. We have a full-time lobbyist in DC or maybe just Juneau to be able to represent our organization, to hold our interests in mind and to be there for us. And, we have legal defense funds that people can donate to on top of their memberships if they so choose to. As well as we have a supporter program, which you can donate money to, and you get a very cool customized patch that is unique for that year.
Okay.
And it's like $20. It's not much. But everything helps, right, for being able to hold the rights that we have as trappers in the state, which are extremely unique across the world.
Yeah.
Not just our country, but across the world.
Right.
Where we have freedoms that are completely unparalleled in Alaska versus anywhere else in the country, where we don't have to tag individual traps. We don't have to mark our trap lines. We don't have to report to state or federal agencies for individual catches. There are so many freedoms that we have as Alaskans to trap whenever and wherever we want to.
And good night, even our bag limits here. Compared to other states,
no limits.
Like, you look at other areas where you can hunt cats, and it's like, you might get 1 bobcat a year.
Yep.
Like, that's your cutoff. And up here, you could run a whole trap line all winter for cats. Now,
Sure.
not to say you'll clean house, maybe you do, but like there's nothing legally saying you have to stop at a certain point.
Yeah,
You know,
it's not
check your regs book, obviously, but like,
it's not unheard of for people to catch 40 cats in a year.
right.
And that's totally healthy and sustainable.
Yep.
And it's really amazing. So the last meeting of this past spring in 2024, there was a gentleman and his wife who I believe came from Massachusetts or New Hampshire, where they were explaining the ways that they had to trap down there. And there was a funky bill that was passed that had nothing to do with trapping, but completely regulated the ways that they were allowed to trap aquatic animals, which were beavers. And so the way that they did it is they were nuisance trappers mostly.
Sure.
So people would call into the state and be like, hey, there's beavers damming up this area and it's flooding my property. Can someone come help? And so the state would have a short list of people who they could call who are reputable and come and take care of that problem for them. But since this bill came through for their state and banned trapping of animals in water, they had to pretty much stop all of it. And within a 12-month period, beaver reports of damage came up by over 400%.
I don't doubt that at all.
And so what they had to do, they could no longer use conibears, which are kill traps.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like a foothold where an animal is there until you come and find it and dispatch it or whatever, however you see fit.
Yeah.
These are traps that are humane, kill them instantly.
It's a body hold. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're big ones too. And so they were no longer allowed to use those. They were no longer allowed to use footholds. So what they had to do is they had to move to these traps that were essentially 2 foot wide by 2 foot tall on both sides. And it was like a cage fence that trapped them. And that's how they would do it. And each of these traps are $400 a piece.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so it completely crushed them financially. But they were still out doing it, trying to be law-abiding citizens and still take care of the nuisance problem.
Yeah.
And so it just shows that with like government unchecked for trying to regulate certain things that might not be in their purview to do, or they are certainly uneducated about, things can really go crazy.
Yeah.
And so for the Alaska Trappers Association here, it's a fantastic organization that has trappers in mind for their rights to be able to continue to do what they've done for what this state has historically been built upon.
Right.
You know, it's not like people weren't trapping years ago.
Sure.
That's how a ton of people made their money. Whenever Alaska was owned by the Russians, that's what they would do. They would trade a rifle for a stack of beaver hides as tall as that rifle.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily about making money, because people really can't make money off trapping anymore.
Not in today's day and age. We were actually just talking with Mark in the last episode. During his time in the bush, that's what he was doing, was trapping and making money.
Yeah.
And, he started in the 80s and went on through, but man, with the market these days, perfect example, like what we were talking about earlier with the, it being a renewable resource, but all these companies are going away from fur. And then what was it a few years back? It was, I think Canada Goose was asking for coyote fur, and coyote prices shot way up. And then, they got some throwback for that. Now they're going back to all synthetic stuff from the last I heard. And it's just really affects the pricing, the financials.
Yeah. And so really, I would say, from my opinion, is that most people who trap are probably doing it recreationally, just to keep it alive.
Yeah.
And it's a way to get out in the bush to see things that you will never see. Like, how many marten have you seen in your life that are alive?
Not a lot.
How many?
I've seen 2 ermine, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
that weren't in traps.
But like, marten specifically, how many marten have you seen?
Outside of that were alive?
Yeah.
None.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so to think about it like this is that marten have never been to a point where they are so scarce they're endangered.
Right.
Even close.
Yeah.
They are very recluse animals that no one gets to appreciate because they're very recluse.
Yeah.
You never get to see the benefits from the amazing fur that they have. They're beautiful, amazing creatures. It's the same thing with like wolverines or wolves. Some people see a couple in their lives and that's it. But for trappers, it's like you can manage populations of ungulates that you really want to hunt and you want to see come back. Or like the Mulchatna herd.
Right.
For instance, it's like that's still closed. And wolf control would do great benefits for stuff like that. And one of the best ways to do that is to trap them.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and because especially a lot of people don't understand how detrimental these predators can be to calving seasons.
It's incredible.
You know, like with that, I'd be lying if I quoted the exact stats right now, but with that predator management they were doing down there with the Mulchatna, which was actually primarily bears that were taken out, they noticed a huge increase in calf survivability for the year after that. And it's all in the documentations. It's all in the records. Like you can look at it. It works.
It's the same thing with the interior for bears, where they collared, I think 20 bears or something like that in the interior, and which stretched out towards Tok.
Mm-hmm.
And they had seen that some bears were capable of killing up to 30 calves a day.
Yeah. It's insane. And
It's unbelievable.
When you're talking about, any kind of recruitment to the population, our moose numbers are fluctuating all the time, but when you have a couple of bad winters in a row, they really start to plummet. We've seen that around the Fairbanks area. The moose I've never seen so few moose around Fairbanks.
Well, that particularly around Fairbanks, it's come to whenever they allowed 7,000 cows to be shot across the river.
That's true.
That's a different situation.
But even after that, because that was several years ago now, quite a while ago now, I should say. But the even after that, just driving around North Pole, driving around the Fairbanks outskirts,
you don't see that many anymore.
You really don't. And it's one of those things where, to the point. So my wife, she just moved up here in 2020 after college, and she doesn't understand why I'm so moose aware when I'm driving. But I've been here since 2009, and when I moved here, there weren't as many moose as everybody talks about back in the day.
Sure,
prior to all the culling of the cows and whatnot. But there were plenty enough that I was very alert, and you had to be, because I remember one time I was driving down what's that road? It's right across from Badger Gas. And I was driving down that, just trying to get home back to base, and man, I almost plowed into 4 cows.
Sure.
In the middle of the wintertime. And I just don't really see those numbers anymore. You might see 1 or 2 browsing on the side of the road or kind of walking in the easier walking, but it's nothing like it used to be.
No.
And taking out bears, specifically grizzly bears are very efficient at killing moose calves, but black bears should not be ignored in that fight.
Absolutely.
Simply because of the sheer number of black bears that we have here.
Yeah.
And wolves especially. After we had, you remember that winter, what was it, 3 years ago, we had the ice? I found well over a dozen winter killed moose on known trails just in the springtime.
Shoot, just last winter, wasn't there a wolf spotted on the Cushman Bridge right under it?
I think so. Yeah.
That was either last year or the year before.
Well, there was one, I think there was one spotted last winter, and then the year before I think we had 2 wolves that were actually like hanging out in town.
Yeah.
I think they were here for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And Fish and Game was trying to like keep tabs on them, figure out where they were going. They just kept running like up and down Noyle Slough and all these other areas. And
yeah.
A lot of houses around there.
For sure.
That's residential.
Yeah. It kind of shows that, with improper predator control, you can find places like California or other states where they have completely outlawed predator hunting, whether it's cougars or whatever. And they've had to then now, instead of hunters bringing in revenue for the state, bringing in revenue to the country through the Robertson-Pittman Act and others, and the Johnson-Dingell Act, that they have to pay people through the state to go and cull those animals through helicopters.
Yeah.
And then at that point, there's no benefits from that.
Yeah.
Instead of individual hunters
paying into the system
and appreciating what they have taken out of it. And whether it's eating it, getting it mounted, paying people to taxidermy it or whatever, it's like all that money is now gone.
And it's just taxpayer funded at that point.
It is.
Yeah.
100%. And it costs way more money than it could have ever brought in.
Yeah. There was some island in Washington, I'm pretty sure it was Washington, where they had an overabundance of deer on this island. And rather than giving out hunting permits, like special hunting permits to go hunt these deer, which, I mean, heck, charged $5, $10. You probably could have charged $50. People would have paid it. They just, same thing, hired a bunch of hunters to go out there and cull off these deer, and who knows what happened to them. You know, people, it's federally, or not federally funded, but state funded people. So now you're spending money. You're not making money. You're not putting money into conservation. You're not putting meat in people's freezers.
Yep.
It's just ridiculous.
And so that's why organizations like the Trappers Association of Alaska is so important.
Yeah.
For people to really pay into and figure out that, you know, there's not a lot of people who have the time or gumption to be so involved in state level wildlife management or federal level wildlife management.
Yep.
That there are organizations that you can put your money into that they will do the bidding that they see best. And it's up to the individual at that point to really look at these and talk to people in the organization to see, like, are you aligned with what I'm aligned with?
Sure.
And trapping is, you know, since it is so unique in Alaska, we have everyone's interest in mind when it comes to trapping is to keep it alive, keep the regulations out, because there are very, very few bycatches that happen that are detrimental to any population out there.
That's true.
And even with that being said, that any predator that you catch is however many moose, caribou, whatever you care about.
Yeah.
There will be more than that.
Yep.
Than whatever you take.
That's extremely true. And I think that's a perspective a lot of people that just look at it from the outside don't understand. They can't wrap their head around that. It kind of falls back to the whole people that don't mix themselves in with the natural order. They somehow think of themselves and their life as being outside of the natural order, not a part of it. And so, whereas us as hunters, trappers, even fishermen, you understand that you are intimately involved in a part of that system, and you taking an ungulate, like you were saying, it's almost your responsibility to make sure that we're not over competing with the
natural order of the world.
Sure. Yeah. You know, where we're not, if you're going to be out there taking a moose, you got to make sure that there's going to be a moose forward. And if a wolf and bear are killing it, that's your competition.
Yeah.
Like, and that's just the way the world works.
Yeah.
That's the way the game is played. So, but another aspect to that is the people that don't understand how we fit in with that natural order. And one thing I've also heard about that is very different here in Alaska is the hunter harassment laws and trapper harassment laws, where trappers here actually have protections for their lines and their traps. And if you don't like trapping and you go down somebody's line and you're just wrecking the place, right? And you're harassing that trapper, that is actually a violation of the law.
It is.
And many states don't have that.
Yeah. And the only unfortunate thing is that it's extremely hard to prove.
It is. Yeah. You're not putting game trail cams on every single line or every single set.
No way.
Every single, it is very hard to prove. I will give you that.
Yeah. But most of those interactions come from lazy trappers trapping in areas that are extremely populated.
Yes.
It is difficult to trap. It's not an easy thing to do. You have to spend money on a snow machine, gas, maintenance, chainsaws, whatever it is to maintain those trails for you to do. And so some of the easier ones are like, well, this is a state maintained trail. I'm going to just set some traps here and, be good to go. And, you can't let a couple bad apples spoil the whole thing.
Right.
And that's where it comes into play, because every couple of years someone's dog gets caught. And unfortunately, some of them don't make it, type of thing.
Yeah.
And, for as much information output that our organization or any organization can do to be like, hey, there's signs, like even down the road. I don't know if you've been to the pull-off right down from your house.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
But there's a Trappers Association sign right there.
There is. Yep. Proceed responsibly. Proceed with caution, trappers in area.
Yeah. And it's not just for the population to be like, hey, there are trappers here. But it's also a sign to show that, like, hey, if you are a trapper, be aware that this is a popular area.
Right.
Don't do it.
And be respectful.
Be respectful.
Maybe go find somewhere else. And
for sure.
And honestly, the be respectful side is for both as well.
Absolutely.
You got to be a respectful trapper, but you also have to be a respectful recreational user. if you're in an area where people do tend to trap.
Yeah. And it's difficult because, like within the Alaska Trappers Association, we have in our magazine and in the manual that we sell, there is kind of like a law or like a rule book of ethics in there that kind of state that like, there are kind of some unspoken, unwritten rules about, for your trap line, you can give it up to 3 years of rest and still maintain, quote, claim to that area where it's your trap line, but others, please be respectful. If you don't see someone trapping this, it might not necessarily mean that it's not being worked at all.
Right.
Maybe a trapper is trying to be like, I caught a lot of stuff here last year, or I didn't see anything last year. So I want to give it a couple years for the populations to come back so that I can come and harvest the most responsibly. Right. And so, me personally, in my old trap line, what I've had is it was in a fairly populated area. So populated as I mean high travel, not necessarily towards any particular town or anything, because I was over an hour out of town in one direction.
Sure.
But I gave my line a rest because I didn't catch anything that entire season. And I came back halfway through this season just to kind of check on stuff, to see what the sign was. And I found people using their traps in my boxes. And so it's quite difficult to deal with, because it's like, that particular situation is a very gray area where under law, you're not allowed to disturb anyone's traps. But if they're in your personal property, but it's on state land,
right?
Where is that? Where is that line of delineation of
right?
What can I do about this? And so
that might be a good Carl question.
Yeah, I was told to proceed with caution.
Yeah,
and that was it.
Well, and I mean, on one hand, you could remove your box, and there's nothing they could really do about it because that's your box.
True,
but then you're disturbing a trap.
But then you're touching their trap.
Yeah.
Even if you don't physically touch the trap with your fingers,
you're moving it.
You're moving it. You're disturbing it, and so it becomes a very gray area.
That's interesting. And since there's no like official registration of trap lines anymore, it's like,
I don't know if there ever was in Alaska.
That's true. I know I've seen a ton of signs, and I know I've seen a ton of like the older signage seems to be a little bit more official. I'm not sure if there ever was like an official registration, but I'm not even going to say it would be a good idea because that would cause a whirlwind of of secondary consequences for a very small amount of benefits. So it's not a good idea to do that. But because a lot of people they don't run a traditional 25-mile trap line.
No,
especially the younger generation, we're all working long hours.
Sure,
you might only be able to run 1 mile, or maybe you have 2 or 3 very shorter ones. Where you're spreading your time out, and you're able to do what you're able to do.
Yeah,
and there's plenty of game for everybody. But yeah, it's just I do see your point on how that can be a very, very hard area to navigate legally, where it kind of overlaps in that regard.
Yeah.
But and this is one thing I try to point out to a lot of people, and you talk to some of these newer guys, and they're like, well, there was a sign on this trail that says this guy was trapping it. He didn't leave a number. He didn't leave anything. He didn't even leave a last name, just Scott. We'll just say Scott,
sure.
Right? This is Scott's trap line. Keep out, Well, it doesn't look disturbed. Well, one, I tell a lot of people, you can't really tell in the spring and summertime if it was a trap line. Maybe the spring, but like summer and fall, everything greens up and grows in. By wintertime, when everything gets covered in snow, all that low brush gets pushed down. That trail will make itself appear. And but the second thing is I've heard is people say, "Oh, well, I'm going in November 1st. If I don't see sign that he's in there, I'm using this trap line."
Sure.
Many trappers do not start setting out their traps until December.
Yeah.
Sometimes late in December, depending on their area.
And
especially once they know that region and they know when the fur primes up. The animals are there in November, but they're waiting until that fur gets prime, because that's when you're going to get the better price for it. That's when it's more kind of worthwhile to take that animal.
Like lynx, for instance, don't prime up until December.
Right. Yeah, so if you're going out there specifically for a line that has mostly lynx sets on it, why would you want to trap them before they're prime?
Exactly.
And so you could go out there November 1st, and yeah, you might not see sign that he's out there, but it's because he's intentionally waiting. And he's going to show up in December and be pretty upset that you're there.
Yeah, generally, I mean, if someone has posted a sign out there,
Mm-hmm.
they're probably invested in it.
Yeah. Yep. And it's just, I know it's frustrating. There are a lot of signs out in the woods around Fairbanks.
There are.
You know, and I've fought those battles too.
Yeah.
You know,
Like I even met with a friend fairly recently who was telling me, he's like, oh, in this area that I moose hunt, there are so many old traps just hanging in the trees. You know, you could probably go take them. I'm like, no. People who do that kind of stuff, they leave their traps out there to be seasoned, to be unscented, to get away from the scents of your house and the scent of your truck driving by every day.
Right.
And it's like, you just leave them out there. You don't touch them. They're not yours. You don't know whose they are.
Right.
Even if that person has died and they're no longer there.
Maybe they have an heir that's coming in there.
Let them go.
Yeah. Their grandson's now going to run that line or something like that. Like, well, and there are laws regarding, you know, making sure your traps aren't set.
Sure.
So if you're finding traps that are set and baited and all that stuff, then that is problematic. But like, you know, if they're just hanging there or stashed or whatever, like, yeah, don't mess with that. That is a world of hurt you're asking for.
Yeah. Because it's surprising how small the state is for how big it is.
Mm-hmm.
And people can figure stuff out.
Oh, yes.
You know,
oh, yes.
Because my particular trap line, I only started trapping in the middle of December last year.
Mm-hmm.
It was an area that I moose hunted for several years in my 20s and had pulled a couple moose out of. And I used to see this guy's signs all over the woods in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, you know, me and my friends would make jokes that he's like the steward of the land and all this stuff. And
he's the Lorax.
Yeah, exactly. and then this past fall, somehow my name got brought up through the Trappers Association. It's like, hey, this guy might be a good person to take over this line. And it just so happened to be that particular line that I moose hunted around for years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to like meet the guy and everything and got the history of it. And it was like a line started in the 50s.
Wow.
And
that's incredible.
And so there's been like 3 people, me being the 4th, who have had claim to this line over the years.
Nice.
And it's just, you know, a real amazing idea that like there are these trap lines that are around the state that people have been using for decades that are still used. Like for the Yukon Quest, for example, off of Chena Hot Springs Road. Dog mushers did not create that trail. Trappers did.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the trappers who maintains part of that trail because it's his trap line.
Yeah.
And so it's just, you know, it's not that trappers are some kind of Elmer Fudd person out there. It's like, these are the people who spend their time and they suffer. And
yeah. Well, and it's a ton of work.
It's amazing how much work.
It's kind of like people when they say bear baiting's easy. Oh, that's not real sportsmanship. That's blah, blah, this, that, and the other. It's like, go do it.
Try it.
Go do it for a season. Let me know. Let me know what you think.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with trapping. Anybody that thinks trapping's easy, how it's just too easy. You just set steel out there and then they step into it. Like that's cheating. It's like,
good luck.
Okay, go try it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, because
you're gonna get your butt kicked the first several years.
Yeah,
until you figure it out.
Oh, I get my butt kicked every season. Last year was the best I ever did, and I think I caught 6 marten. That's it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
And I don't look at how much money I spend in gas because I don't want to know.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't look at those numbers.
I do it for the fun of it. You know, I bring my kid out there, ride around on snow machines, bring top ramen, cook it up in a little jet boil, you know, have fun, cocoa and coffee and, you know, have fun. I don't plan on building a cabin or anything like that, but it's just being out there and like taking the time to stop and be like, look at these tracks. What do you think they are?
Yeah.
It's like, is it a squirrel, a marten, an ermine, a mouse, a lynx, a wolverine, a wolf? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
What direction are they traveling? Why are they traveling this way? You know, it gives you a perspective of the woods that they're alive year round.
Right.
It gives you a respect for the animals that the average person does not have.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely it does. And I think it's awesome to bring young ones out there, especially because when you're, you know, it's amazing for those of us that kind of got into this stuff a little bit later in life. You know, maybe we didn't grow up 6 years old on a trap line.
Sure.
But when you do, I mean, you're raised with that wonder of the woods, I guess you could call it. Like, you know, it's so much more healthier to go be looking at trails and understanding the relation between different lures and different animals or different baits and different stuff and like figuring out these puzzles in your head that are actually applicable in life. than just wasting away in front of a screen or in front of, just whatever.
Absolutely.
It's like, it's such a better way to grow up.
Yeah.
And so many of us I had a pretty good upbringing. Don't get me wrong. I was outside all the time, but just not in Alaska, And so, but I would have loved to be out there trapping. The only thing we ever really trapped back in Kansas was raccoons.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, they're not any less cool.
Right.
I mean, they are a little, but
yeah, they're a little, they're pretty neat, but,
but I mean, it's the same thing for anything where it's like raccoons are a devastation for ground nesting birds.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. In the States. And so whether you talk about wolves being massive and bears being massive predators for wolves or for moose and caribou, it's the same thing with raccoons.
Absolutely.
For different species of birds that are, for their populations are going away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a huge contribution to, geese. And I think even, what were they talking about? They were just talking about on Meat Eater the other day. I think even cranes, but
it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But it's this, it's the thing about like, if you love wildlife, they have to be managed in some kind of way.
Yes.
Right. Where you can't just say like, God will sort it out and nature will sort itself out. And it's like, it's not available to us in this day and age of technology and cities and trash being everywhere for animals to get so accustomed to going into. People have to do something.
Yes. And so you guys having a representative down there to represent, trappers' interests and to recognize when things are trying to be passed that would impact trappers. That's huge.
Very much so.
Yeah. And so what'd you say, once again, the membership cost for somebody who wants to get involved?
$30.
$30
for a year.
For a year.
Yeah.
And it's $500 for the lifetime?
It is.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm about to become a lifetime member for myself. The money is not going to waste. It's going to fight for the rights of trappers around the state to be able to maintain their rights and maintain the heritage of trapping, which is equally as important.
Yeah. 100%.
Because some of the best books that anyone will read about life in Alaska, whether it be 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, there's not many that old, but most of them center around trapping.
Yes.
Being a way of life.
Yes.
Being a way of food, a way of money, just a way of bartering everything.
Yes. And as we've seen with, all forms of politics and regulation making and, no matter what aspect of life we're talking about, but in the modern day and age, people that do not live your lifestyle and do not live where you live and do not live in your environment can change the rules for the way you live.
Absolutely.
And so you might be fighting a battle that you don't even know is going on. You could be running your trap line every year and out of your, let's say you live out of town a little ways from Fairbanks and there's no light pollution, you're left alone, you don't even realize there's a huge battle going on in Anchorage or Juneau over the way you live. Why would anybody care the way I live, right? That's the mindset a lot of us have. I'm just going to do my thing. You need people fighting those battles for you.
Yes.
And especially, when a lot of these board members and whatnot are in their elderly years, and they're maybe retired from their careers, their kids are grown, things like that. They have the time that a lot of us don't have to dedicate to things like that. That's their retirement plan, or not retirement plan, but retirement busy time is to fight for the thing that they were passionate about their entire life and really help out with that extra time to do the battles that somebody who's working even 40 hours a week would struggle to do. But especially a lot of us aren't working 40-hour weeks. A lot of us are working 60-hour weeks.
Yeah.
And it gets really hard to keep up with all of the different things because guess what? The antis are not standing back, and they're not letting work get in the way of trying to stop trapping and create new regulations.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing where a couple years ago, Sitka Gear Products, they were against the drilling in Anwar and exploratory drilling.
Yep.
And it's like the most buffoonery idea that you could ever get behind, where it's like you have this gigantic corporation that's probably owned by some giant parent company that has deep pockets, that has a massive presence in some kind of giant city that's probably going to be a left-leaning city that's against those types of things. but yet their products are made from petroleum. And where does petroleum come from? Drilling. And so it's like you're against the very thing that you make your products from.
Yeah.
Make it make sense, please.
You can't.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it happens nonetheless. So that's great. It's good that there is a lot of different avenues from the sounds of it, because some people, when they start hearing these words, sponsorships or memberships or things like that, they start to think, oh, well, I'm not rich enough to really throw my money at that. But I mean, for $30 a year, yeah, you're not going to be paying majority of the bills, but sorry, that was a confusing thing to say. You take your $30, compound that by all your buddies that trap, pay in their $30, and all their buddies that trap pay $30. It adds up to a lot in the long run.
It does.
I mean, if we can build that membership to a high enough number, and then even if you're a small business, but let's say you're a passionate trapper and your dad trapped, and you don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to throw at an organization just because you believe in what they do, but you do have a few $100s you can throw.
Mhm.
I mean, anything you can do to really fight that fight, and like you so well put it, is continue that culture, preserve the culture. So I really think that's a great thing. What are some other things the ATA does as far as outreach goes, for kind of getting away from the regulatory world, but maybe like for trappers, for like resources they provide, training? I know they have the meetings. You want to kind of break down how the meetings work and stuff like that?
Sure. So I'm not as well versed in the South Central chapters and what it is that they provide.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the Fairbanks area goes, the first Tuesday of every month from October through April, we have a meeting at the Dog Mushers Hall. It's 7 o'clock to roughly 8:30 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And we usually bring in people to speak about trapping, whether it's like this year, the Trappers Association is celebrating its 50th year.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've had people who have come up and spoken about like what time was like 50 years ago, who are still trapping today.
That's incredible.
And it really is. And so like this past month in Fairbanks, we had Rico DeWild on, who was from the TV show Life Below Zero.
Okay.
And so he spoke about his life as being native, living out in the village or out in the extreme bush with his family, and rotating between different cabins for the different seasons, fishing, trapping, hunting, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
As far as outreach goes, what we do is we offer various classes throughout the winter years, whether it's like a general trapping class, which we have in October out at Lost Lake, which is like a 2-day thing where we have instructors that break down everything about trapping. It'll make your head spin about how much that the people there have combined 200 years of trapping knowledge to download onto you in 2 days' time. It's just truly amazing how much knowledge these people have.
Yeah.
So we have like snare making workshops, fur handling workshops, wilderness first aid workshops, becoming an outdoors woman workshops that we partner with through the state of Alaska Fish and Game.
Yeah.
And that encompasses quite a bit as well. That's a whole nother tangent of outreach that we do, but we help with the beaver trapping part of that.
Awesome.
One of our board members does work at Fish and Game, Bob Hunter. And so the outreach that we do it's there, and we're working with expanding it as well.
Mm-hmm.
We're working with rural, like the Koyukuk-Kuskokwim school districts and the Yukon school districts. We're working with putting trapping classes to homeschool subjects and everything to bring it out back to the rural areas to teach young children about trapping, what goes into it, how to maintain traps, what to look for when you get something, what to do with it.
Yeah.
Everything about it. And so it's truly teaching the next generation of everything that goes into it.
That's amazing. And that's an important thing too, because there's a lot of that culture that has unfortunately been affected by so many different regulations out there in the remote areas of the state. And so to bring that outreach and include them in these educational platforms is really amazing. That's really good.
Yeah, and it's just starting. As our organization gets bigger, our goals get larger.
Oh, sure.
And the way that we are able to do that is through more members to come in, to bring the money, to bring the outreach back into the community more and more and more.
Yeah.
Because traditionally, we've held these classes in the interior every year for decades, right? I think we just celebrated like 22 or 23 years at the Lost Lake Boy Scout camp.
Nice.
For the Trapper School. So, I mean, it's been going on for a long time. But what we want to do is we want to create larger classes to be able to accommodate more people and build more classes. So, I mean, that is all still in the works, but for sure, we still have the general trapping school, snare making workshop, wilderness first aid, fur handling workshops.
Yeah.
And Bob Hunter, who is one of our board members who works at Fish and Game, he hosts the fur handling workshop.
Okay.
And he is someone, I can't remember the name of the fur tannery that's back east, but it's like one of the oldest and largest fur tanneries to this day. And so he comes in, like he apprenticed there for many years.
Wow.
And so he can come in and, he teaches you how to split the lips, the eyes, the ears to really turn what you catch into a perfect product.
Yeah.
That you can appreciate, whether it's, you got your first lynx and you want to put it on the wall and keep it there for decades or whatever.
Sure.
Or you want to turn it into a ruff for your coat or your wife's coat, or make a hat or mittens for your kid. There are so many different avenues that you can use fur for.
Oh, 100%.
And if it's not something that you really want to get into, you're like, oh, I'm not big into skin sewing, I don't want to do that. There are so many people around town, whether it's professional fur tanneries or local mom and pop people, or just individuals who will take those furs that you catch and turn them into products that you can appreciate.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely, they will. Yeah. And all over the state. I mean, it's a huge thing here in Alaska. And I know there's people that'll actually take work, if anybody's listening in a lower 48 state, that, I mean, they'll take work, I mean, they're good at fur handling, and they know what they're doing, and they make great products, and so, that's amazing. And there is a huge population of people that I talk to all the time that they want to get into trapping. They're curious about trapping, but maybe they came from an area where they weren't allowed to trap growing up, or maybe their families didn't trap. They didn't have that generational knowledge. And I hear all the time, like, oh, I don't even know how to set a snare, dude. Like, I'd love to go snare foxes. I don't even know how to set a snare.
Sure.
What is a conibear? What's this? How does a foothold work, and all this different stuff? And, not even knowing how to run a trap line, or even start down that idea of what it would take to run a trap line. And it's, from the sounds of it, if you just show up to these meetings and participate and like sign up for the workshops, that there are these resources available to get people on that road, to where you don't have to sit there and wonder and rely just on YouTube, because that's another thing. I mean, that's very specific to Alaska. It's the same thing with predator hunting. Predator hunting is a huge thing up here as well, and it does fall under a trapping license. But when you start looking up things online and trying to figure out, okay, well, how do you call on a fox? How do you call on a lynx? Very hard to find information specific to Alaska, and even Canada, really. What you're going to find most of is like coyotes in Arizona or coyotes in Kansas.
Sure.
Or,
and it's not necessarily applicable.
Yeah. And it's finding that location specific knowledge, like that. I have a copy of it here somewhere. It's the manual that you guys give out. It's amazing. I mean, it really is.
We do sell a manual that kind of breaks down all major critters, all major fur bearers of the state, and generally how to set it. And it has detailed, very well drawn diagrams of the ways that are productive. It may take some time to find out. You're like, well, I'm in a spruce forest. There's not a lot of willows around.
Yeah.
Well, but there might be some that carry over. Well, maybe all those willow patches that you want to target this animal, well, maybe they're just not here. You can search around and find.
Right.
And some of the big things that I've heard is like, well, I go to these meetings and it's very hard to approach people. And that's totally understandable. It is, but you just kind of have to, we've been working as an organization to be more friendly to newcomers. And, for instance, this past meeting, at the very beginning of the meeting, the president said, who's here for the first time?
Yeah.
And said, if you have any questions, board members, please stand up. And the board members stood up, and they're like, find any one of us at any given time, ask us questions, and we will talk to you.
Yeah.
Within the magazine there, all of the board members, including the president's phone number, is written in there. So if you have questions, any of them will take your call.
Awesome.
And there are ways for you to find out information or, the next step for anyone at any given process to take about, man, I'm down. I can do marten. I can do lynx. I can get fox occasionally, but wolves and wolverine evade me.
Mm-hmm.
Help me bridge this gap.
Yeah.
And there are some people who will talk your ear off more than you could ever imagine possible.
Make you regret asking the question almost.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a fella by the name of Jim Masick, who is known as the wolf trapper of Alaska. And he's still around, and he comes to the meetings, and he's still a board member, and you can call him.
Yeah.
And you can talk to him.
Yeah.
And he will talk your ear off like nobody's business. You can give him hyper specific scenarios of what you're running into. Well, why did this particular critter avoid my snare in this situation?
Yeah.
And he'll give you a reason why.
That's amazing.
And just the institutional knowledge that our organization carries across the state, not just in Fairbanks, is truly unparalleled.
Yeah, it really is. And, and it's kind of back to that, the thing about being welcoming to newcomers, it's almost a cultural thing back in the day that when you were trapping, you were kind of like, shh, hush hush about it a little bit. You didn't want somebody knowing where you were going. You didn't want somebody else encroaching on you. You didn't want, that competition level per se. But in the modern day and age, to have something where they're actually doing outreach to help new folks get into it, that is going to take some getting used to for a lot of folks.
It will.
And it's almost like, this last spring we did a whole half day event about how to go bear bait as the Northern Hunter. And we got some flack because people didn't, like, why are we doing this? Like, why are you doing this? And it's like, well, because we need people out there. Like, yeah, sure, maybe I'm creating competition for myself. Guess what? I don't actually care, because the more people that are doing it and the more people that are passionate about it, that's more soldiers in the fight. That's more people who are going to stand up and say, yes, this needs to be preserved. And especially with today, I mean, I know so many new people that are getting into trapping, and they've only been doing it for a few years. I mean, heck, I'm one of them. I mean, I'm recently getting into more of the winter activities, and trapping is heavily on the top, very tip top of that list. That's why I love talking to people who trap. I love going to these meetings, and it's a really wonderful resource that I think is well worth investing in for anyone, in town. Especially, I mean, let's just face it, some of our military guys that, might otherwise up and leave because they can't figure out how Alaska works. They might go to some of these meetings, learn some of this information, be successful, and absolutely fall in love with this place. It could change somebody's life, and it's a really, really cool thing that you guys do over there.
Yeah. Some of the probably most well-known books about life in Alaska that kind of give you like an almost Renaissance type view of what life was like back in the day and how unbelievably unparalleled everything was, 50, 60, 100 years ago here. Most of those people aren't from Alaska.
Right.
It's
Right.
people who aren't necessarily, because what I found is like people who are born and raised here, they might not necessarily they might take it for granted.
Right.
Versus someone who comes up here and is like, holy smokes.
Yeah.
This is what's available to me. Like, not only am I allowed to fish or hunt year round, well, shoot, there's this dead period of winter where I'm just cold and miserable and it's dark. Well, it's like, shoot, I can buy a couple $1,000 snow machine and just rip around and go find this. And it's like, what the heck footprint is that?
Yeah.
That's a wolf. Oh my gosh. And start frustrating themselves in the woods with snares and footholds and, but it's just an unbelievable opportunity that we have here in Alaska to do everything we want year round and just rotate through the different seasons of different critters.
Yep.
And the cool thing, like, I've met a lot of people who they don't necessarily trap, but they'll buy a trapping license because that opens up the opportunity for you to take other critters out of normal hunting season that you would know without it, you wouldn't be able to take those animals.
Yeah. Or at least have those bag limits.
That's right.
Like for a lot of the predator hunting that we do around here, if you're wanting to go call lynx and call fox and heck, call wolves, whatever you want to call, right? A lot of those are covered under a hunting license during certain seasons, but with much more stringent bag limits. And you start operating under a trapper's license, and there are rules to follow and there are regulations. Definitely get the book, learn yourself up on all these different things, especially per area. Interior might have different rules than South Central. South Central is going to have different rules than Southeast, and all. It's unit specific, just like everything else. And again, we always fall back to read the regs for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Saying you heard something on the Northern Hunter is not an excuse to get out of the law, but you'd be surprised. It really does open up so many freedoms, and for somebody who maybe doesn't have the patience to run a trap line.
Sure.
But that money is still going into conservation.
It is.
That money is still going towards that passion.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing goes with these meetings. I mean, for $30, if you're the kind of person, what was that quote? That gentleman made a quote. It was, I want to say he's passed now recently, and that's actually where I saw the quote, but it says you only need 2 traps to have a trap line. It was a gentleman at the ATA, and ashamed of myself for not knowing the name, but it's true. You don't have to go dedicate yourself to 25 miles of line. If you just want to play around for a year and try different sets, you can do it. And I mean, $30 a year to support a group that's going to protect those rights and provide all this education, well worth it, I think.
It goes a long way.
Yeah, it does. So let me ask you this question here. As somebody who, has been getting into trapping, and you've been doing it for some years now, for the last segment of this, let me ask you this. What would you say were the toughest lessons you learned starting off? And maybe even, if you feel so inclined, some like gear setup recommendations, whether that be just to keep you warm out there while you're like, let's say you're talking to somebody who has not spent a winter in Alaska, and they're just curious. What would you say is like the number one mistakes you made or things you learned?
Well, I make mistakes every time I go out. It never ends. And like I'm a very small time trapper myself.
Sure.
Like
yeah.
I've never caught a lynx, I've never caught a wolverine or a wolf. Like I've caught, a few dozen marten, and I've caught some ermine and a boatload of squirrels.
And we thank you for your service in that regard.
Yeah. And so like for me, one of the biggest tips that I would make for people who are just getting out, because like with anything, you learn to walk before you run.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't necessarily go out to the woods and think, I'm going to set this snare and there's going to be a wolf in here in a week or however many days you want. Right. So it's you kind of learn kind of how everything works. And so for me, one of the most effective sets that I've come across that I do a lot everywhere on my trap line, I have right now about 30-ish miles of trap line.
Okay.
And a lot of my sets are pole sets for marten.
Mm-hmm.
So it's where you have a standing tree, you cut down like a 10-foot, 12-foot long piece of spruce somewhere that has maybe like a 3-inch diameter to it, maybe less. And you put it at like a 45-degree angle, and you leave like 6 foot out to where you have 6 foot of tree coming out from the side, and then you can attach the trap towards the top of it. And, you can hang a piece of bait kind of on the bottom to attract the animal to walk up it, but keep birds away from it at the same time. Right. And so the thing that I'm still playing with and that I found most effective is trying to judge where I need to put the trap from the end of the pole, whether it's multiple feet down, closer towards the end, and that for me is still kind of a sweet spot. And what's kind of interesting about that is that like most other critters in the world is that males are generally more advantageous or adventurous in their search for food, where instead of setting like a box on the ground for critters to go into, you might catch females in there. And just like with most other ungulates or anything else, if you kill or take more females, it's going to hurt the population way more than males.
Right.
And so with pole sets, the nice thing about that is that females are a lot less inclined to climb poles than males are.
No kidding.
And so generally the take that you will get from pole sets are males. So you're being able to take critters without necessarily damaging the overall populations.
Yeah.
And it's not saying that you'll never get a female, because I've caught females in pole sets too, but overall,
The vast majority.
The vast majority are males.
Nice.
And so it's just playing with exactly how you set that trap, where it is, whether you bend the spring over towards the dog, if you have the spring towards the bottom or the top, if you're looking for the front foot catch, the back foot catch, it's all kind of, it's like mystical almost with how it works. And so it to me, it's just so fun to try and figure out exactly, can I do exactly what I'm targeting for?
Right.
And that just comes with patience. So the biggest thing I can give anyone is just to be patient.
Yeah.
Take your time. Be methodical. Think about how you're doing it. Think about what you want to do.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of silly, but it's like, think of yourself as the animal to like be like, okay, well, how tall do fox walk, or how tall do lynx walk?
Yeah.
It's like kind of get down there and look, because if you're standing up, and especially if you're sitting down on your snow machine, you might be taller than you normally stand. And so you're seeing the woods from a vantage point that makes sense to you as a human. But if you get down towards the bottom, it's like, whoa, there's all these channels through these trees that you can see. It's like, that's a perfect spot for a snare. That looks amazing. And stuff like that. And so it's just to be patient and look at things and, just be creative.
Yeah.
And try and do it. And
100%.
And the manual that the Trappers Association sells has so many tips and tricks that can help you not make as many mistakes as you would without it.
Absolutely.
Or talking to people.
Well, and you pointed out the diagrams and the images that are drawn into it. And that for someone like me, I am very much like
a visual learner.
A visual learner. Like, my wife will hand me a book and she's like, "Hey, you should read this," and I'm like, "Does that have pop-up pictures?" But that's huge for me, because I can read a description of a set, but like when I'm looking at this picture of a drawing of a branch with, a set hanging off of it, or like that marten pole that you described, that is in there. You can visually see what you're talking about right now. That's a huge thing for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people. It helped me out a lot. The other thing I would say is being adaptable and not being too stubborn.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to commit to a set that's not working just because you're stubborn, where this, maybe it didn't work for you at all the first year and you're just going to run that again the next year. Now, you don't want to abandon stuff too quickly, but like at the same time, you don't want to, like, if it's not obviously not working, you have to adapt.
Well, sure. And it's like the same thing of population swing. It's the same thing with the hair cycle, where it's like in a 7-year high-low period. It's the same thing for other critters that follow the populations of those, like lynx. And it's okay, well, this set hasn't been working for the last 2 years. It's like, well, what's the hair cycle doing? Why don't you talk to Fish and Game? Why don't you just talk to anybody who is in the outdoors or just with your own eyes? You're like, have I been seeing rabbits around town? If you live on the outskirts of town, it's like, what am I seeing?
Yeah.
And so, through your own visualizations or figuring things out kind of on your own and your own assumptions and whatnot, it's like, maybe the population's just not there. Maybe it is a good set, but maybe you're just in a low population area.
Yeah.
It's not like there's 100 marten per square mile across the entire state. Some places are barren. Some places have unbelievable populations. So yeah, it's just trying to figure stuff out, be patient, be deliberate, be methodical.
Yeah.
It comes back to journaling about, what did you see that day? How many tracks did you see going which direction? Were you high in elevation or low in elevation? But to answer the second part of your question, when it comes to gear, for me, it's all about layering. And anyone who says anything about staying warm or comfortable in outdoor of Alaska, whether you're sitting over ice fishing, just sitting there, or you're working a snow machine through a trap line, you're going to sweat, you're going to get crazy, because riding a snow machine is a lot more work than people think.
It is.
And so it's all about layering. Get rid of cotton.
Yep.
Find some old bunny boots at a military surplus store. They'll keep your feet warmer than anywhere else. And they're waterproof for the most part. And it's just layering.
Yep. Yeah, layers goes a long way. And for any military member listening to this or veteran, there's a reason they do the 7-layer equics when you get stationed here. It's because that's what works. They don't just hand you one big piece of gear that's going to keep you warm and then you just wear your t-shirt underneath. Because, man, I'll tell you what, I have been out when it is -30 and sweating like a dog.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you start working hard and you're cutting those poles and you're just man on and off and on and off and on and off. You're just even just walking. When it's that cold and you're layered up and you've got all your layers on and you start going for a hike, you'll sweat when it's -30, -40 out,
Mm-hmm.
and that's bad news.
Yeah, and for me, like for my trap line for maintenance, I don't bring a chainsaw. It's all axe.
Yeah,
and so
so you're really getting a workout.
So it's like before I start having to cut down anything, I have loppers, like big pruners, small, tiny little handsaw, and a really short axe.
Yep.
And so for those things, it's like, okay, take the jacket off. You got to cut some poles. You got to maintain it. You got to figure it out.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and again, it's all stuff like work within your ability. If you've never been in -40 before, maybe don't go 30 miles off the road.
Absolutely.
Your first run. Like work your way out there. Figure out what gear works for you. What keeps your toes warm, because it's especially if you don't know the area, and let's say you try to cross a little bit of water and you're not familiar with snow machines, and maybe you get into some overflow or something like that.
Bad news.
There's a
very
lot
fast.
of people that are missing digits from going into overflow,
Mm-hmm.
because you might not go under the water, but your feet might.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're 20 miles out somewhere and it takes you forever to get back, I know a lot of people that are missing digits from that. So you want to be within your push your comfort level for sure, push your boundaries, make sure you're always constantly pushing yourself to that next level, but don't try to jump 10 levels.
Yeah. I have a cutoff of -30.
Yeah.
If it's -30 at my house, it's going to be colder when I get there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just dangerous at that point. Because not even just for yourself personally, but I mean, machines do weird things when it gets cold too.
Mm-hmm.
Oil, gas, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's whether you're riding a 2-stroke machine or a 4-stroke machine, they handle differently, and the extremes of cold and
how well the maintenance been done on it.
Yeah.
Has it been used, abused, and put away wet, or have you taken care of it? So, it's all, especially if you're running your first year with a second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand machine where you have no idea the history of it. Make sure you put that thing through the ringer and make it earn the trust you're about to give it. Because they can get you places that you might not be able to get out of by yourself. So
yeah, there's something to be said for those old machines. Like I have a 1986 Tundra, and it's an old 2-stroke, and I premix the gas. I removed the oil injector for it, and my son rides it now. But I mean, my buddy Carson, who was on this podcast a couple episodes ago.
Yep, great guy.
I took him trapping last winter, and he came on my trap line, and I bought a new to me snow machine last year, 2011 Scandic 600 Ace wide track.
Buddy.
That is like a Cadillac. Dude.
Yeah, buddy.
Oh my gosh. It is so nice. And so I let him, he wanted to come, but the only other snow machine I had was that Tundra. And so you could just see him just get beat to crap on it.
He's not a little guy either.
No, he's a lot heavier than I am. And he's like just bouncing around, and it's loud and it's obnoxious and it doesn't steer well, and you really got to muscle it around, and it's not comfy. And so I remember by the end of that day when I brought him out, he was like, I can't believe how much work this is. I cannot believe how much I'm sweating right now.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, trapping is a lot of work, whether you do it on snowshoes, on skis, snow machine, dog sled, whatever.
Yeah.
None of it's easy.
No, it's not.
But it's about the love for the outdoors.
Well, and anybody who loves the outdoors, really nothing's easy.
No.
I mean, it's good night. Sheep hunting, like, that's not easy. Moose hunting's not easy. Most caribou hunting's not easy. Some is, but most isn't. And it's people who enjoy going to the outdoors kind of just embrace the suck. And honestly, for me, that's one reason I had to start getting out in the winters. It was just that downtime. It was too much. I can't handle the downtime.
It's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're used to just going. Now, again, there are extremes where days you wake up and it's -50 outside. Yeah. You're just not going to go do anything that day. But to have a goal, to have something you can chase and pursue. I mean, just for your own mental health, good night. We have one of the highest suicide rates of any state because of our long winters, because of our long dark period, especially on the military bases, especially, with people who are constantly moving in and out of the state and whatnot. It's very hard to adapt to this. Now, I don't know what it is about me. I've never struggled with the dark or the cold as far as like seasonal depression stuff goes. I kind of just immediately adapted to it when I moved here, and it was odd because nobody else seemed to. But a lot of that I contribute to the fact that I'm a very driven individual that has to be busy all the time. I'm almost addicted to being busy, and that's part of it. You keep your mind occupied. You keep your mind busy. This gives you a goal. It gives you a focus, and it's a really, really cool one at that. It's based on a lot of history, a lot of heritage, and you get to continue something that, as you so pointed out, most people in this world don't get to do. They don't have the ability to do what you're doing, and it's a very special thing, I think. So
yeah, and you don't have to go broke doing it either.
no,
You don't have to buy shiny new traps and go through the process of degreasing them or dyeing them or waxing them or whatever. It's like you could find garage sales.
Oh yeah,
And they're there.
and they're everywhere.
Or you could, find the Facebook page for the Alaska Trappers Association and be like, hey, I'm looking to get started in trapping. Does anyone have any? And it's like, for me personally, probably have 24 traps. I don't need these anymore. Like I'm just not using them.
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those things where it's like there are people who have literally thousands of traps in their personal stock that they're not doing anything with. And a couple bucks a piece.
Yeah.
Big deal. And like you said, only 2 traps to run a trap line.
Yeah.
You start with squirrels.
Yeah.
Like I let my kids trap squirrels at home with one of those big Victor rat traps that you get from Ace Hardware.
Nice.
And so like, and
Nice.
he put some peanut butter on there.
Yeah.
Check back in a day or two, and it's like, holy smokes,
Yeah.
there's a giant squirrel in here. This is awesome.
That's a good idea. I'm gonna have to do that around this breath.
Oh man.
You're not gonna catch anything but squirrels in there. I mean, birds and stuff maybe, but like, no bycatch is what I was getting at there.
Pretty much.
No, and like you said, I mean, and this is why I like asking everybody questions. And I know you kind of caveated your trapping there, but like, from the starting stages to the most experienced stages, there's lessons to be learned from every stage, and there's inspiration to be earned from every stage as well. And somebody who's going out and running a line their first year, and maybe they don't catch anything. It's pretty common your first year, right?
That was me.
Yeah, me too. And it's like you can either get really annoyed, really upset, and quit, or you can listen to the stories of other people who have stuck with it and continue to learn and continue to adapt and continue to grow and just be committed to the passion and start seeing success. And they're starting to get better, and they're starting to produce more. And it's one reason we always start the show. I don't know if you've noticed, but like almost no matter who we're talking to, we almost always start with the backstory. And it's because even if I'm talking to the most, the most pristine moose hunter, or the person who has the most sheep on their wall of anybody in the state, they all started somewhere. At one point, they'd killed no sheep, and it's like it's just anybody can do it. You just got to have the time. You got to have the dedication, the grit, as we call it.
Yeah.
It's like that's anything in Alaska. So, yeah. You got anything else you want to say to the new trappers or about the association?
Just that, come to a meeting, reach out, don't be shy. Just because someone might be old and curmudgeon-y, don't let them put you off.
The old sourdoughs.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much knowledge to be had around that people love talking about. Just the organization in general wants to do good, and we are doing good.
Yeah.
And we will continue to do good.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming in this evening and sharing that information with us and telling your backstory and your tales. It's been a really pleasure. Let me ask you this. Where can people where can they find like you and follow you if you want to give that out? Or and how can they get in touch with the association and kind of see what's going on with the ATA? So
alaskatrappers.org is our website. And it's a pretty slick website. We just rebuilt it. So it's a lot nicer. We have an Instagram page as well, YouTube page. For me personally, it's Gottshling.ak. on Instagram, and that's pretty much where I'm most prevalent. You know, sharing stupid memes, showing pictures. You know,
right?
Just
it's what we all do.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's just a fun time.
Yep. Perfect. All right. Well, I hope everybody got some value out of this and really decides to invest in the ATA. It's a great organization. And again, to everybody listening, thank you so much for hanging in on this one with us. We're hoping you have a great winter time out here in Alaska, and you decide to get into something of this nature, whether it's trapping or predator hunting or anything that'll keep you busy. We're going to have a lot of episodes coming up on different ways to stay busy, so keep an ear out for that. If you have any questions about today's episode, or you have any questions you would like addressed on the show in a future episode, feel free to reach out to the show. If you go to the website, thenorthernhunter.com, you can hit that contact button right on the homepage and get an email directly to us. And we also have Instagram and Facebook. If you go to the search at The Northern Hunter on either one of those two, we try to answer all messages as fast as we can. So any questions you might have, feel free to reach out. Make sure you hit the merch store while you're there. We've got our shop page on the website. We'd love to have you rock a Northern Hunter logo, and if you do, please send us a picture. We'd love to see it. And there's also a partners page there with a bunch of companies that have decided they like what we're doing and they want to help us out. So we got discount codes there. We've got Troy Sessions with the 60-inch Club. He's a good friend and a big sponsor of the show. He loves what we're doing. We're going to have him on here soon. We've got Hammer Bullets, and we've got Stealthy Hunter, all making great gear for getting out in the outdoors and making your life a little bit easier out there. So use those discount codes, get yourself some good gear, and you can help us make some more content and go a little bit further with this thing. So, Harrison, thank you again for spending the evening with me. And
thank you.
To everybody out there, until next week, get out there, get after it, and good luck. We'll see you there.